It's time once again for Evolve Sales Live. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Jonathan Fisher. Great to have you with us today. So imagine this. You've identified a key account, connected with all the important stakeholders inside that company, tailored your offering, customized a killer proposal, and you've now delivered that proposal along with the best pitch of your life with all the decision makers present, only to have them say to you, "That was great, but we have a policy of getting at least 3 proposals. We'll be getting back to you." What do you do now? When you're 1 in 3, how do you stand out? Well, our guest has the answer. John Livesay is a specialist in helping companies level up their pitch in a major way so they can stand out from the crowd and become revenue rock stars by using the power of story. With a deep background in marketing and sales, John first made his name while working for notable companies such as The Daily Beast and Conde Nast, where he won Salesperson of the Year. He's gone on to write 4 books and become a highly sought-after coach and keynote speaker, and we're excited to have him as our guest on the show today. John, welcome.
Thanks, Jonathan. Wonderful to be with you.
Very good. Okay, so I don't know if I have a delay here, but my everything's looking A-okay on my side. My producer's saying there may be a glitch. It just means the show's going to be that much better, my friend.
That's right.
And we got, let's see here.
We have a hello from a Tim C. I see that.
Yes. It says we're streaming right now. Maybe on the producer's end. All right. Perfect. So we'll edit that out in the future, but all of you live people, you get to see the real thing, right? This is real, authentic, live production, so you got to love that. So, John, as we said, we're fantastically blessed to have you with us. Excited to talk about this issue of standing out with the power of story. I want to tell our audience a quick reminder. This is live, and we want you to participate, so go ahead and start thinking of really good questions, even during the conversation. Throw those right into the chat, and at the end of the talk, we're going to get back into some Q&A right here, right now with our guest. John, let's start at the beginning. Tell our guests a little more of what you do every day, if you would.
Well, you know how there's so many salespeople, but especially those who work in healthcare and tech sales, like Olympus Medical or Bausch+Lomb, they struggle when they are invited to come in and present to stand out and not drowned in this sea of sameness where they're just seen as a commodity. And as if that's not bad enough, unfortunately, unlike the Olympics, at the Olympics, you get medals for 2nd and 3rd place, but in business, you don't. So what I do as the pitch whisperers, I come in and I teach them how to tell a story that makes their offer memorable and magnetic, because whoever tells the best story is the one that gets the sales. So companies bring me in at their annual sales meetings to teach their team how to become storytellers so they become revenue rock stars.
I love that. That's great language. Everyone loves the idea of having revenue rock stars on their team. But, a lot of folks have great people. Let's be honest about that, right? With good solid skills, a great pedigree in terms of their background, and they get out there and they're fighting every day, and still the numbers aren't what they could be desired to be. What do you think is going wrong when it comes to closing deals, and especially given that the typical standard operating procedure is to get multiple proposals right on the table?
Right.
Where are there misses happening out there?
Well, the first mistake I see most people make is they push out facts and figures, thinking that the logic is going to make people want to buy something. This equipment makes your surgeries go 30% faster. Why don't you want this? In fact, we all buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. And part of the problem is that we've all bought into this myth of, in order to get someone to buy from you or hire you, they have to, know, like, and trust you. And so that belief causes the behavior of, well, let me send you more information about my company, more information about the facts and the speeds and feeds of how this all works. So I flip the script, Jonathan. We start with the gut. It's a trust thing first. In fact, the handshake came about to show you didn't have a weapon in your hand. So trust is transferred with warm introductions, things that you do that build trust, eye contact, all of that good stuff. So we start at the gut. We make sure that this email's not spam, or that I can trust what you're saying, sometimes by being a little vulnerable. And then it goes from the gut to the heart. And that's the likability factor, because they've done all this research. In fact, Tim Sanders wrote a great book called The Likability Factor, showing doctors spend more time with patients they like, teachers spend more time with students they like. So the better you can describe the problem and show empathy for what that person is experiencing, the more they think you have their solution. So we go gut, heart, and then finally head. Still not the time to push out facts. Here's the unspoken question everybody has when they hear you pitch. Will this work for me?
Hmm.
They might trust you and like you, but if they don't think it's going to work for them, they're not going to buy it. And that's where storytelling comes in. Because when you know how to tell a story that other people see themselves in so much, they say, oh, I want to go on that journey with you. That sounds like me.
Well, and I can hear what you're saying about wanting it to be a really good connecting of those dots, right? What is in it for me, everyone's favorite radio station, and making certain that the numbers do make sense. You can validate those. I'm seeing in a lot of pitches in my own experience, looking at companies, putting in things like case studies, putting in things like better market research data, putting in better maybe in the form of social proof, other users' comments, trying to up the game on that side. That still doesn't sound like storytelling to me necessarily.
No,
So
let
let's
me
talk about that a
explain.
little bit.
So first of all, I turned case studies, even the word study sounds like homework and boring to me,
Hmm.
into a case story.
Hmm.
So when you have a case story, it's got 4 elements to it. The exposition, the who, what, where, when, like a journalist. You got to paint that picture to get someone in the story.
Hmm.
Then you describe the problem, the solution, and then finally the secret sauce is the resolution. What is life like for someone after they bought your product? Most people don't have a story with that in it. Imagine if The Wizard of Oz ended when Dorothy got in the balloon to go back to Kansas and it was the end. But
Mm-hmm.
no, there's that wonderful scene where she's in bed and she said, oh, there's no place like home and you were there and all that great stuff. That's the resolution. So what does that look like in the real life? Instead of that equipment being 30% faster, the reps now tell this story. Imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was 6 months ago down at Long Beach Memorial using our equipment when he could go out to the patient's family an hour earlier than expected and put them out of their waiting misery. And if you've ever waited for someone you love to come out of surgery, you know every minute feels like an hour. He came out, he said, good news, the scope shows they don't have cancer, they're going to be fine. And then turned to the rep and said, that's why I became a doctor, for moments like this. Now that rep tells that case story to another doctor at another hospital who sees themselves in the story and says, that's why I became a doctor. I want your equipment too. Now the client said, oh, that gives us chills. Not only are we not telling stories like that, but it never occurred to us to make the patient's family a character in that story.
Hmm. That's really powerful stuff. I mean, if you're watching me and not listening, you'd see I got a big smile as I'm listening to this change from 30% faster. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds good. I like 30% faster, but
Right,
it doesn't move me. But
right.
that really took me into this other realm. I mean, we've all been in situations, or most of us, if you've lived long enough, have been in situations like that. I
Yes.
love that. So
Thanks.
when it comes to taking what companies have right now and beginning to transform it into more of a storytelling thing, what's that look like? What kind of process do you take clients through?
Well, I tell everybody you need to have 3 stories in your toolbox. Think of your brain like a jukebox or a playlist, depending on your age. Instead of music coming out, different stories come out. So you need multiple stories. So you're telling the right story at the right time to the right person.
Hmm.
So in that particular situation, we were telling a story to another doctor. If we were talking to the CEO of a hospital, we'd have a CEO story, or a purchasing department story.
Hmm.
Now, I tell people all of your stories need to have 3 C's. It needs to be clear, it needs to be concise, and it needs to be compelling. So let's dive on each one of those. If it's not clear and you confuse people with a bunch of acronyms, no one's going to say I'm confused. They're just not going to buy because the confused mind always says no. Then it needs to be concise. And here's the real exciting part, Jonathan. You need to have your story so concise, like the one I just gave, so that people can remember and repeat it for the meeting after the meeting.
Hmm.
So you know what the meeting after the meeting is? That's the buyer hears 3 proposals and then they have their own meeting after that meeting. They go, well, what do you think? Well, they all sounded the same. I guess we should go with the cheapest price. No,
Yep.
that's not what. I love that story they told about the patient's family. And that's what we want our experience to be here. We need that equipment. So that's how they can repeat that story, even if they didn't hear you present it. And then finally, it needs to be compelling because when you tell a story that tugs at people's heartstrings, they open the purse strings.
Well, heartstrings to purse strings sounds right. Now, I could hear somebody out there questioning that because they're thinking, well, I mean, a lot of the DMs inside of these companies are just they're old school pencil pushing, bean counting kind of
Mhm.
individuals, right? So they may or may not be moved by a story. It depends on process. What would you say to that?
I would say it's our job as salespeople and storytellers to create value that justifies something. And I have another story to show you exactly what that is. So I was working with Honeywell, and they make a division that makes fans in the operating room. And they were talking about how fast the fan was spinning and the particles in the air and all that good stuff. And they were talking mostly to purchasing to people who are like that person you described. They're just like, we need the specs and we need the cheapest price. That's it. So I said to the team, what happens if the fan doesn't work? Because remember, in any great story, the stakes have to be high enough for people to care. And
Hmm.
they said, well, the patient could die if the fan doesn't work. They could get infected. That's why we have to that fan keeps the room clean. And I said, okay, great. And then I said two magic words I want everyone to go away with. Anything else? When you ask people anything else besides the presenting problem that's going on, you find out really deep problems. And they said, well, and this is before COVID, our doctors and nurses are constantly, cutting people open with lasers, and there's all kinds of smoke that fan has to clear out. And if it didn't work, those people could get secondhand smoke damage. And I said, aha, that's the story. And we're
Hmm.
going to be telling it to HR and not to a purchasing department, because HR cares about the safety of the employees.
Hmm.
And once we had that story to a whole new person, sales took off.
Well, that's playing off the fact that there's rarely only one final decision maker. There's multiple
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders, and you look for where you have an edge. I like that.
Yes.
I'd love to hear another one like that. What's another time when you have, you're trying to figure out because it's not almost never exactly the same person, right?
Correct.
What's another time you had to pivot?
Well, I was working with an architecture firm, and I was helping them win $1 billion airport renovation. So talk about the stakes being high.
Hmm.
They had been told that we've picked our final three architects. You could all do the work. That's why you're in the final three. We're going to pick the team we like the most. They might as well be tech people. They didn't know what to do with that
Yeah,
criteria. They
yeah.
said, we just show our designs and hope that wins the business. So they brought me in, and I worked with them on their story of origin. So instead of just, everybody has a team slide when you're presenting. This is who you'd work with if you hire us. It was very dull. We've been here 5 years. This is what I do, blah, blah, blah. Instead, I pulled out individual stories. So I said, what did you do before you worked here? And one woman said, well, I was in the Israeli army. I said, okay, I bet you learned about focus and discipline. And since you're in charge of making sure this thing comes on time and under budget, you got the perfect background. How about you, Bill? I got into architecture when I was 11 years old playing with Legos. Now I have a son that's 11. I still play with Legos with him. I'm very passionate about this.
Hmm.
That's what made them stand out and up their likability factor, because people feel like, oh, I got a sense of who they are. I'd like to work with them for the next 6 years.
Hmm. This makes a lot of sense. This is a counterpoint to some of the old school connecting with people based on whatever you notice that they play
The
golf or
weather, this,
fishing,
yeah.
the weather, the yacht, and the picture in the corner of the family. Which I mean, all that stuff has its place if you have an opportunity to do that in a genuine way. It's pretty rare that you can do that in the virtual space. And I think a lot of folks have been scrambling for some kind of like if you go there in person and you're in the office, you can very naturally, especially if
Yes.
you are interested in lots of things, you can find a connecting point that can still hold. On LinkedIn, I don't know, man. It depends on the profile, right? You may not have much to work on. So this sounds like this would be a great way to kind of go around that. What are some other advantages of using story that you've seen?
Well, another advantage of the story of origin is you can then ask them, how did you get into whatever the field is? And
Mm-hmm.
they start telling you their story. Well, originally I was going to be a doctor, and then I became this, or very rarely do people have a linear path. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's asking them a question about them as opposed to commenting on a picture on their desk. So
Right.
that stories do two things. They make us memorable, because research shows that we forget 40% of what you say after you say it, but we're wired to remember stories. And also the stories pull us in. It's a different part of our brain that's going on. So the other part of it is a story about the company. So many people get up and they go, well, we've got this many offices and we've been in business this many years. You want to tell a story about the company that shows its values and actions. A lot of companies today say, we're all about diversity and sustainability. Have a story about that in action so that people can relate to that culture and say, oh, it sounds like our culture, and bring that to life beyond just what the mission statement is with a story. My favorite example of that is Tom's shoes.
Okay.
So you remember you buy Tom's shoes. It used to be you buy a pair and
Right.
they donate a pair to a third
Buy a
world
pair and give a
country.
pair, basically. Yeah.
Yes. So the guy, Tom, was starting this out and he had a few successes, and but he couldn't get Nordstrom's to distribute the shoes because he was only talking about the shoes. He wasn't telling the story. And then he told the buyer about going down to Venezuela and a bus and seeing this woman with her 3 young boys running alongside the bus crying, but the boys all had his shoes on. He goes, why is she crying? The interpreter said, I don't know. I'll find out. Turns out before they had those shoes, they had one pair of adult male shoes that were way too big for the boys, but that's what they had. So the boys would put their little feet in this big shoe and shuffle to school, go to school, and then shuffle all the way home. And then they'd have to give their brother the big pair of shoes. So they only got to go to school 1 out of 3 days. And it took them forever. But now that they had these shoes, she was crying tears of joy because every kid could go to school much faster without being made fun of and go every day, and their grades went up. And he told that story to the buyer at Nordstrom, and she got a tear in her eye, and she's like, I'll take all the shoes.
All the shoes
that you have to offer. Yeah. So that's a story about the company's values and action.
That's really powerful stuff. Why do you think companies have taken so long to get to this? I mean, some of the very best stuff, even coming out of the 1950s and all the big name original marketing, right? You go back and read their stuff. They use story to varying degrees in various creative ways.
Yes.
Has it been lost, do you think? Is it just there's too much happening in the world of commerce that these are lessons that have been forgotten? What's your opinion on that?
Well, when Ad Age interviewed me about the Super Bowl commercials, it was all about which commercial is telling the best story. So they're spending millions of dollars shooting them, and for the airtime, those brands know that it's about the best story and being part of the buzz of the Super Bowl. So I think part of the problem is when you get out of, a Super Bowl situation and into, we're going to give you some training on the product and here's all the speeds and feeds. Sales people are not trained on how to tell a story of a client that is using the product. They're only talked about the details, the features and benefits. And it's no longer enough just to talk about features and benefits. So, and if by chance they are telling a story, half of the people make themselves the hero of the story. You're not the hero of the story. The client is that you help. You're the Sherpa or Yoda in the story. The other big problem is the stories go on and on and on. There's no ending because they don't know the structure that I just gave everybody on how to tell a great story.
Well, you anticipated where I was going to go next, which is ask how can you do story wrong? Like, are there some other ways that you mentioned a couple there? So are there other ways? Could it be that you apply it the same way across the board? Because I can imagine you need to tweak it quite a bit if you're talking about, say, a video advertising campaign for digital marketing or on mass media versus in a pitch. It's going to be pretty different. Talk to us about that.
I think the biggest mistakes, besides the story going on and having no point and not being memorable and not being clear and making yourself the hero, is that you just aren't telling a story that's authentic. Your stories must be authentic and be true, because other people can smell that a mile away. I think that's the number one thing I would say. If you're going to tell a story, make sure it's true and it's about you. In fact, I was working with somebody else and they said, I don't really know what my story of origin is. Can I just tell the other guy's story about Legos with his kid? I go, no, that's not your story. we eventually found a story for him, by the way. But yes, that's another. Yeah, all your stories have to be authentic.
Now that brings me to an interesting challenge, because a lot of our audience members are going to be in startup mode. They're beginning a tech solution and they're all of 2 years old, right?
Yep.
And so they don't have a lot of case studies from their real experience. What do you advise them to do in applying this methodology?
Well, if you can tell a story of origin that you yourself were in, how you discovered the problem that you're solving, because I know I was frustrated with this. I figured there's a lot of other people that were frustrated with this.
Right.
That really helps. Now, I see one of the questions here is the founder story the new elevator pitch? And I want to make the distinction between your story of origin and
Mm-hmm.
an elevator pitch. I call them elevator stories, no shock.
Yeah. Yeah.
The whole goal of an elevator story is to intrigue people enough to say, wow, Jonathan, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the elevator pitches are usually boring, monologue, and they're just going, nobody remembers anything. So I have
Right.
a quick process on how to tell a good elevator story. You don't even talk about what you do until step 4. So the first step, you literally just say the phrase, you know how, because that's very conversational, right? You know how this winter was really cold or whatever the topic is. You know how, and then you start describing who you help. A lot of tech salespeople struggle, and then you describe their pain with the word struggle, not to be seen as a commodity. And then the fourth part is I'm known as the pitch whisperer. I come in and teach them how to tell stories. And after that, then the fifth part is what's life like for them. And so if you tell a little elevator story like that, and people are like, wait a minute, I'm intrigued. I know what a horse whisperer is. What the heck is a pitch whisperer? You plant little seeds in there to intrigue people to want to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
So even if you don't have tons and tons of clients, you describe how whoever your target audience is for this tech product is, how people in whatever, people who have to do human resources and performance reviews are struggling to make them relevant and current, and people hate them. And so what we've developed is a solution to that, and it's called this. And after using this program, it's much more efficient and effective, and people feel like the feedback is more relevant and timely. So you describe what that journey is going to be when people start using your tech product.
Well, I love it. And, we're powered by a fantastic application known as overpass.com. And you know how you need to grow a company very quickly? You need access to top talent quickly and under budget if possible. Well, we help those who struggle to grow their sales teams very quickly. You can go into the Overpass marketplace and find pre-vetted, talented professionals looking to work for your business. You can search by industry and quickly interview and hire them in a matter of days. People that use Overpass find that life is easy as they grow the team very quickly every day using this free to start platform. Check it out at overpass.com. How did I do?
Great. I loved it. That was really fast on the fly like that. And then then we start tweaking it, right? Because you did a really good job. Now we say, what can we make it a little more emotional, maybe, right? So no longer will you struggle with jobs that are open for months at a time, and you're leaving revenue on the table, right? So paint that picture of what happens if they don't fill those jobs fast.
Sure. I love it. Yeah, I gave it a go. My heart rate got a little faster there. I got nervous, but I thought I'd give it a go.
No,
and
I'm glad
I love
you
it
did.
already. I could see it applying across the board too, and I think that was kind of the segue into that, right? I mentioned how do you pitch in different formats. I mean, that you could use that in YouTube video, you could use it in mass media marketing, you could have a lot of fun with that. You could even have fun with it in your pitch, couldn't you? I could see, it's almost skit-like, right? You could kind of talk about it a little bit, have some fun with that.
Paint a picture.
Yeah, right. So what are some other ways where you can apply a story a little differently? So we have these different formats that we're kind of talking about here today. Is there anything else we're leaving out here?
I think the big stories you want to have is your own story of origin, the company story, and then the case story. Most people forget the first two stories and jump right into the product, and it's still not a story.
Yeah.
So if you develop those 3 kinds of stories, and then once you're in the world of case stories, I tell people, let's identify your 3 big avatars, right? Like in the case of Overpass, who is it? Is it a small business owner typically that buys this product?
No, it's going to be typically a technical, like a B2B, either a software as a services company or B2B services type company. They're typically going to be probably through their first couple rounds of funding, and they're looking to grow and really hit that curve.
Got it. All right. So now we've identified one avatar. I'm guessing there's at least 2 others, correct? Because most companies have multiple avatars.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there are multiple verticals that I mean, it's fantastic for a lot of companies, no question.
So we would have the B2B description that you just gave us, They're in round 2 of their funding. Then we literally look for a case story of someone who just finished their second round and was struggling to grow as fast as they wanted to, and yet had all the stress from the investors to start hitting some numbers, but they needed the right salespeople. And so this is what allowed them to, and you tell that story to that avatar. So having multiple avatars, each having their own story, is the next level of getting it ready to go, so that you're not a deer in headlights, and that you can customize each case story and not having to wing it.
Now, I want to talk about how you would get your team to apply this, because my mind always goes to the next level, which is to replicate the thing, right? Like if I'm running the team and you're talking to me, John, you're going to sell me in the first couple minutes because you use story to sell what you do, and you do a very excellent job with that.
Thanks.
How do I inculcate that into my team effectively?
Well, typically people bring me in as a speaker, or I do workshops, or I have an online course, and you start working on the basic structure, and then you have each other practice the stories with each other.
Okay.
And so you say, oh, and I have clients that now take all of the stories across 200 salespeople and put it on a repository map, so that all the different stories from each different situation can be found easily, and you can use someone else's story if you don't have an example that fits that ideal avatar. And then once people start sharing stories across divisions, silos come down, it can become an onboarding tool, because you can put your own story of origin on the repository map. So stories can really change a culture.
Yeah, for sure. I love it. Well, we've blown through a fantastic conversation already, John, and we're going to have a little Q&A here in just a few moments. I do want to let everybody know you have a special offer. I'm going to put it up on the screen. Would you go ahead and make the audience aware? What are you offering here today?
Sure. I have a new book. It's called The Sale is in the Tale, Tale, because it's a business fable about a sales rep struggling to not get out of a slump. They didn't know what to do, and then they learn about the power of storytelling. So if you text the word pitch with a P, P-I-T-C-H, to 66866, you will get the first chapter for free.
All right, so I'm going to put that there on the screen for our live audience. We'll put that in show notes for our podcast listeners, but The Sale is in the Tale. That's going to be available on Amazon, but if you text the word pitch to the number 66866, you can get, what was it again, the first chapter for free?
Yes.
Love that. That's great. So that's a nice offer for our audience. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump over to Q&A, and if you haven't already, audience, go ahead and send in your questions. We've got a number of good interactions here with us already. I'm going to ask one as I'm kind of taking a look, and we'll start sending some more through.
Okay.
It's a little off to the side, but I've seen some people use a story approach, and it isn't their story. It's maybe a famous person's story.
Oh, yes.
And they'll drop a big name. They'll drop like an Elon Musk, or they'll talk about the Rockefellers and their financial services or whatever. What are your thoughts on that? Is it cheesy, or can it be done okay? Because you said it needs to be authentic. What are your thoughts?
Well, as long as you don't pretend it's your story, right?
Okay.
But if you've interacted with that person, like for me, I sold advertising to Speedo when I lived in LA. And I convinced them to do the event with me based on Michael Phelps, who was on their payroll during the Olympics, to come to that event. So I have a picture of me with Michael Phelps, and I'm telling a story of Michael Phelps and what he said to me about why he's so successful. That's so much more meaningful than just quoting Michael Phelps. If you've got your own connection with that person, the story is much more interesting.
Sure. Or maybe, would you say, maybe if you were inspired by, I don't know, Mark Twain or somebody, whoever you're going to quote. I'm just making that up.
Yeah.
But you can say, hey, I've always been inspired by, and can you still make it personal? Would that be advisable?
Oh, yes. I mean, think of how many people, talk about Oprah as their inspiration, and she got inspired by people before her. So yes, when you, it just has to be specific of, we don't need another story about Elon Musk or Steve Jobs unless it has some relevance to how that shifted your story.
Yeah, for sure. Tim just makes a comment on a question. He says, don't sound bored by your own product or service. I thank you for that, Tim. And I think he's kind of chiming in. Others were mentioning, too, how important tonality is and delivery. We didn't really get into that. Could you share maybe a few key notes on how to deliver the story?
I tell people, when you have a big meeting coming up in a pitch, you need to think of those as your Olympic moments or your Super Bowl moments or whatever you want to reference. And also remember people like Hugh Jackman, who were on Broadway every night, 8 shows a week. You think he phones that in? No.
No.
He is up there giving it his all every
Yeah.
single night. He's not bored with the song or the
Hmm.
dialogue, and we can't be bored with the song or dialogue either. And that goes back to, why am I doing this in the first place? Do
Yeah.
I really believe in what I'm doing? Do I care? People buy your energy, because
Hmm.
money is energy. So
Yeah.
that's really where it gets very quantum physics on you. But if you don't have the energy, nobody else is going to be energetic.
Yeah, got to get back in touch with your why. Some of the stuff you hear it forever, but we need to be reminded very often.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a good segue to another question that Andrew mentions. What do you say to CEOs when they're maybe hesitant to be vulnerable? Maybe they don't want to
Mm,
share their personal story too much. What are your thoughts on
yes.
that?
The fear of being vulnerable is very common. And I myself was given that note by my speaking manager about, let's be a little more vulnerable in your talks,
Mm,
because you have the credibility, you've written books, you're on stage, but the audience needs to relate to you. So good leaders today are very different than leaders from 20 years ago,
mm,
where it was very hierarchical. You do what I say, don't ask me any questions. Good
yeah.
leaders are willing to say, I know what I'm doing and I have some ideas, but I don't know everything. So I'm open to hearing what other people think without
Mm,
feeling like it's taking away from their credibility.
mm,
Because I have a whole philosophy that our soft skills, listening,
mm.
empathy, storytelling, and even vulnerability give us the emotional connection we need with our team and certainly with buyers.
Yeah, for sure. Jackie Lamb refers to Tommy Boy, circa 1995. Do you know what she's referring to?
I don't. I know
Okay.
Tommy Hilfiger, the fashion king. And I think there's I can think of Big Bob's Big Boy, but the Tommy Boys, so we'll have to get somebody to Google that
Follow
for
that
us.
up, Jackie. Tell us. That might have been a movie. I can't remember, but follow it up. Let me know what that was. Um, what would you say are some of the applications of story across the range of marketing efforts? So, is this something that's suitable, say, for a cold email campaign? Is it suitable for your phone scripting for SDRs to
Hmm.
be using? And how would
Yes.
that maybe need some further tweaking by way of
Um,
application?
I just got an email from my friend Scott Monty, and the subject line was "A Tale of Two Layoffs."
Okay, nice.
And so you instantly know it's going to be stories. And he was describing the contrast between how Twitter is laying people off and how Stripe is laying people off.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
you're reading about it, and he's comparing and contrasting. One management company took responsibility for overhiring, one was not taking it that angle. So stories can definitely be a great way to get people to intrigue with you in an email.
Hmm. So, and what about like in phone scripts? I mean, cold calling's not going to die anytime soon. We talk a lot on our show about different ways to do it better, how to do it in conjunction with a more well-rounded style effort, omni-channel style effort of business development. What about in that format? Can I just launch into some, I don't know. I'm thinking about like I'm getting hung up a little bit. I'm thinking about, I've written a lot of
Sure.
cold call scripts for clients myself. How
Well,
would you
let's
apply it
let's
there?
talk about genres of storytelling and movies that use them and brands that then use that. So
Mm-hmm.
three separate, all connected. So you'll never watch a movie the same way, and you'll now be able to start looking at ad campaigns in a new way. So the first one is rags to riches. That's the
Okay.
genre.
Mm-hmm.
Cinderella's the movie, right? Sitting by the fireplace in the ashes, and then boom, this transformation. That's what you want to take your clients on, this amazing magical transformation. Um, Oprah Winfrey is a person that had a rags to riches journey. I
Mm-hmm.
met the CMO of Domino's Pizza when I was speaking at the Coca-Cola Summit, and I said, you know, this pizza is all about taking people on a journey. And he said, yes, well, Aunt M's Pretzels, who's also here with us, said that, she's in airports and malls now, but she started at one farmer's market. That's a real rags to riches story.
Mm.
So that's one genre. Another genre is Rebirth. My favorite
Okay.
movie that does that is It's a Wonderful Life, coming up for the
Mm.
holiday season, right?
Mm-hmm.
And let me make a different choice. Prudential says your retirement is your third act. It's not just a continuation of middle age. Let us help you plan it.
That's pretty good stuff. I like
Yeah.
that.
So
Yeah.
you can start to see there's movie genres that are using storytelling, brands that are using it. And when you can start to look at all the different genres and figure out which one do I want to lock into.
That's good stuff. So it probably is pretty challenging if I'm just cold calling you hey, John, we've never met. My name's Jonathan, blah, blah, blah. Or is it? I mean, could I start with, hey, we found other companies were struggling with blah, blah, blah. We thought you might be interested in how they solve that problem. I mean, could that be a good lead in? Follow up with a white paper
Absolutely.
by email and pull them into your
Yeah.
funnel?
And again, I am not big on sending facts and data, white
Mm-hmm.
paper, because it's just you're in the left side of your brain where you're doing this analysis paralysis. I need more data. You tell
Yeah.
a story, you get people to be able to summarize it and go, okay, this is what we need. So that's what goes into, if I can put something in a subject line on a cold email that grabs people's attention and happens to hit them in a moment, they go, what is this guy, Jonathan, in my head? How does he know we're struggling with this?
Right.
A phrase to use in an email like that is, if you're anything like me, or if this sounds like something you're struggling with, let me tell you how we can help you like we've helped XYZ person.
That's good stuff. I wasn't the only one curious. I know some of the other audience members were as well. What do you call a white paper then? So obviously you associate that moniker with something dry, data laden.
Yes. Please read my 50-page description of data. Yeah. And then that should give you enough information for you to decide this is such a logical decision. I have to get it. Right. I'm much more into what, because you're asking someone to change the behavior when they're buying something.
Yeah.
So in my case, I'm asking people to hire me as a speaker. So my job is to mitigate the risk.
Right.
Here's video of me in front of hundreds and hundreds of people. Here's testimonials. I customize. Yeah, I have to make them say, oh, I future pace them. What's it going to look like after a week after the event? Are people going to remember what I said? Is it going to change the sales? You paint that picture. So when you're selling something with just numbers, you become a commodity then, because it's like, yeah, we're doing a lot of analysis on this. There's no sense of urgency to even make a decision, right? And because you haven't described a story in a way of somebody else waited and they really regret waiting.
Well, one of the things you reminded of us earlier, and I really appreciate it, is that we don't make our decisions from the rational center. We make our decisions emotionally, and then we validate them rationally. I think I first heard that from Zig Ziglar probably 3 decades ago or longer. Sorry. I wish I weren't that old. But yeah.
It's okay.
It's just as relevant. And he's written it probably 50 years before that. So, I mean, it's definitely still relevant today. And this is one of the most powerful things I'm hearing about why storytelling is so effective is we're appealing to the center of decision-making.
Yes.
And we're kind of going around that. So we argue over the issues and we bat them around, and we almost enjoy doing that in our rational center, right? That's kind of the fun part of the rational center. If our brain had two personalities, right? The other personality wants to go with the moment, go with the flow, go with what we're feeling, and wants to do it right now. And if we can appeal to that more quickly, that's good. Are there unethical ways that this could be a superpower if you could get really good at this, right? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Are there ways that this could be abused? I didn't think of this earlier in the conversation, but it's occurring to me now.
Well, I think the biggest blatant one is what we talked about earlier, that you're telling a story that's not true or not yours. That to me is the biggest misuse of it. Sometimes you'll see that on a TV show, right? A doctor tries to convince a patient to have a surgery and they make up a story about themselves or another patient, and it's not true. Yeah. So I think that's really crossing the line. But for the most part, if you're just an authentic person yourself, then you're fine. And stories that actually happen to you and lessons you've learned, or stories of other clients you've helped and how happy they are, you can't go wrong if you stay in that lane.
Well, John, you've been a fantastic guest. Thanks so much for being here and offering so much value, not just to our audience, but to myself, to the whole team here at Overpass.
My pleasure.
And thanks to our audience for joining us once again and making this fast-growing show such a success. Hey, keep on coming back, same time, same station next Friday, and bring a friend. We'll see you then. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye now.